Do you ever just feel completely swamped by health information? Like there's just so much out there, but nothing really pins down those mysterious symptoms.
That brain fog, maybe, or the kind of fatigue that sleep just doesn't seem to fix.
Exactly. It's easy to feel like your body is just, I don't know, fundamentally flawed or broken somehow.
Yeah, that feeling of being lost, wading through all the conflicting advice, especially when you're dealing with health challenges. It's incredibly common. You're definitely not alone in feeling that way.
Absolutely. And that's precisely why we wanted to do this deep dive. We took the specific stack of material really focused on brain and nervous system health.
Right, specifically from two books, Brain Saver and the companion guide, Brain Saver Protocols, Cleanses, and Recipes.
Yeah, and our mission here for you listening is to sift through these sources and pull out the key insights. We want to understand the perspective this material offers on, well, the real reasons it claims are behind a lot of modern health struggles, particularly brain stuff.
And also uncover some of the specific tools it puts forward for actually navigating these things.
It's actually kind of telling, isn't it? The sheer amount of information was apparently so huge, it had to be split into two books.
It really was. That gives you a clue about the level of detail, how many factors this material looks into trying to help people who are genuinely struggling.
And a big message right from the start in these books is, look, this isn't one size fits all. Everyone's health journey is unique, right? Shaped by different exposures, different experiences.
So the goal isn't some rigid prescription. It's more about giving you insights, tools from this specific material that you can then maybe tailor to your own situation.
Kind of blending that deeper understanding with practical steps you might actually choose to take.
Okay, so let's unpack the core idea here. The starting point in these sources is basically that our brains, our nervous systems, they're facing challenges like never before. They're really struggling.
And the books offer this whole vocabulary almost to describe these struggles. They talk about things like a static brain, an alloy brain, a viral brain, emotional brain.
Inflamed cranial nerves, a burnt out or deficient brain, addicted brain, and even an acid brain. Different ways the brain can be physically struggling according to this view.
Yeah, and what's really different here is the perspective that this isn't just because, our bodies are faulty or weak.
Right. Instead, it points to specific physical causes that it argues come directly from living in the world today. Modern life, basically.
So a lot of health challenges, especially the neurological ones, are seen through this lens of things happening to the neurons.
It could be, according to this, coming from critical deficiencies, the brain not getting what it needs, or contamination.
Contamination like heavy metals, toxins, certain viruses.
Exactly. Or even, they argue, physical damage that comes from stress and really intense emotional experiences.
Okay, so if contamination is a big piece of this puzzle, what are these things and where are they coming from?
That's the logical next question, right?
Yeah.
And that leads us straight into a major part of the books focusing on what they call brain betrayers.
Brain betrayers. So these are internal threats, things we eat or take.
Yeah, specific foods, supplements, additives that, according to this material, actively harm brain and nervous system health, often without us having any clue.
And the way it's presented, it's not about making you feel guilty about food choices, is it?
No, not at all. The aim seems to be empowerment through knowledge, giving you information on what this material suggests might be harming your health so you can make informed decisions for yourself.
Okay, let's look at some specifics. What food betrayers do they highlight?
Well, first up, soft drinks. And that includes the conventional ones and the ones marketed as natural.
Oh, interesting. So even the natural ones.
Apparently, yes.
Yeah.
The books argue they are always harmful. They list things like corn syrup, aspartame, MSG, often hidden in natural flavorings. They say artificial coloring, carbonation, caffeine, preservatives.
And maybe low-quality ingredients that could have heavy metals?
Right. Plus, they mention a guarantee of unlisted, unlabeled mystery ingredients. So pretty much a blanket avoid on those.
Okay.
What else? Citric acid. The advice is to avoid it whenever possible, unless, it's in a product giving you some massive benefit you can't get elsewhere. The idea is it's an irritant.
Got it. Now, here's one that seems to go against a lot of current health trends. Fermented foods.
Ah, yes, this is a big one in the material. The argument presented is really counterintuitive to many. They claim fermented foods don't contain the beneficial bacteria we think they do, and critically, they don't fight off bad bacteria.
So what do they do, according to this source?
They argue that bad bacteria and viruses actually feed on fermented foods. So true healing, in this view, isn't about adding fermented stuff. It's about removing the food source for the pathogens and using specific tools to actually get rid of them.
Wow, okay. That's definitely a different perspective. What else is on the food betrayer list?
Dairy, including colostrum. The claim here is that dairy feeds pathogens, viruses, and bacteria and can accelerate chronic illness.
They even reference classified medical research.
Yes, suggesting that labs know this because they've apparently used dairy and bovine colostrum specifically to feed and grow pathogens. Human colostrum is noted as the exception, though.
Okay. And eggs.
Eggs are described very starkly as a perfect food for viruses, something that speeds up their growth.
And the connection is?
It's linked to the common lab practice of raising viruses in chicken eggs. And the neurotoxins produced by viruses feeding on eggs are seen as highly inflammatory, especially to the brain and nervous system.
Gluten is probably on the list, too.
It is, yes. Seen as feeding viruses and bacteria. They link this to symptoms like fatigue, brain fog, even weight gain, especially if viruses are munching on gluten in a liver that's already struggling.
Nutritional yeast.
Also specifically named as problematic.
Okay. And you mentioned industrial seed oils and fats earlier.
We'll circle back to those. Yeah, they come up later when we talk about body chemistry, acidity, and nutrient absorption issues.
All right. So moving from food to supplements and additives.
Yeah.
What are the betrayers there?
Well, common food additives like aspartame and MSG are called out as highly toxic chemical invaders.
What kind of damage do they supposedly do?
The claims are pretty serious, creating diseased tissue, killing brain cells, causing physical damage like pits or lesions, leading to brain atrophy, messing with emotional centers, potentially making people unstable.
And addictive, too.
Highly addictive, according to the source.
What about specific supplements?
The list is quite long. It includes things like cod liver oil and shark liver oil. The reason given, they're said to concentrate toxins, particularly mercury and other toxic heavy metals.
Colostrum again as a supplement?
Yes, same reasoning as before feeding pathogens. Deer antler or velvet is also listed.
Caffeine-based stuff, energy drinks, fat burners.
Yep, linked back to the view of caffeine itself being a brain betrayer. Even mushroom coffee with caffeine falls under this.
Okay, this next one might surprise people too. Internal clays, like bentonite, charcoal, diatomaceous earth, and zeolites.
All listed as problematic for internal use in this material.
Yeah.
It even mentions that some people, hearing maybe that chlorella isn't great in this specific framework, might switch to charcoal.
Which this material also advises against taking internally.
Exactly. It's quite specific.
What else is on that supplement no list?
Let's see. Chlorine dioxide, sodium chlorite, turpentine oil, digestive bitters, HCl supplements, herbal tinctures that are in alcohol,
Okay.
L-carnitine, L-arginine, mineral oil, oyster supplements, pearl powder, large amounts of sodium bicarbonate, and whey protein powder.
Wow, that's extensive. So the overall impact of all these betrayers, food and otherwise.
According to these books, it's not just irritation. They argue these things heighten sensitivities, actively create diseased tissue, and, as mentioned, are highly addictive.
Yeah.
This can lead to this sort of unconscious dependence where you're driven to consume them without even realizing why.
Okay, so we've covered internal betrayers. What about threats from the outside? Toxic exposure.
Right, the sources get into external threats, too. Things that undermine health, often without us really knowing or agreeing to it.
Like what kind of things?
They talk about chemical industry, domestic invaders, think common household stuff, fragrances and cleaning supplies, laundry detergent, body lotions, hair products, makeup,
Dry cleaning chemicals, nail polish.
all of that. Spray tans, hair dye, talcum powder, they're described like Trojan horses that kind of condition us to feel like we need these chemical scents and products.
And you might not even notice if you're constantly exposed.
Yeah, the source mentions you can become smell blind from chronic exposure, which makes it harder to detect other harmful chemicals around you.
Scents. They also mention fungicides.
Yes, saying they often have this distinct perfumey smell and can be found on new things you buy, even things like the outside of scented candles, not just on produce.
Okay. And then there's a concept mentioned called chemtrails.
Yes, described in the material as chemicals released from planes. The claim is these contain a whole cocktail of industrial chemicals, including toxic heavy metals like mercury and copper, plus old, outdated chemical waste.
That's quite a claim. What about something more everyday, like water?
Water supply contamination is definitely highlighted. Pharmaceuticals getting into the water system from, well, human elimination, affecting reservoirs, irrigation, public water, even wells and fish.
So exposure happens through drinking tap water, cooking with it.
Brushing your teeth, swimming. The material even specifically calls out restaurant water as often containing pharmaceutical runoff.
Wow. Okay, you mentioned copper before. There's a point about industrial copper.
Yes, and it's important to differentiate this from the healthy, trace mineral copper our bodies need. This material states that industrialized copper is found in both conventional and organic food.
How can it be in organic food?
Because, they explain, copper from pesticides and herbicides can stay in the soil for longer than the 7 years required for organic certification, so even organic crops might absorb it.
And the point isn't that we're lacking copper.
Definitely not. The source emphasizes that having too much of both types, the industrial and the trace mineral, is common, and lack of copper is absolutely not why people are sick, according to this view.
So all these exposures, internal and external, they just build up.
Exactly. The material uses the phrase death by 1,000 cuts. Contaminants accumulate in the brain over time. And because everyone's mix of exposures, the types, the locations in the body, the timing is unique, symptoms vary hugely from person to person.
And these things don't necessarily have to get deep into the brain tissue to cause problems?
No, apparently effects can be more superficial, but still really impact how you feel and function.
What about the blood-brain barrier? Isn't that supposed to protect the brain?
That common belief is challenged here. This material argues it's not impermeable. Things like nuclear and industrial waste, solvents, heavy metals, and many pharmaceuticals do cross it, according to this source.
Okay, so invaders identified. Now what about the body's internal environment? Like its chemistry, acidity, fat, deficiencies.
Right. This is another area where the material offers a really different take, especially on acidity.
How so?
It explains that the body becomes acidic not just from diet, but also from certain supplements, environmental exposures, and even the adrenaline released during stress.
And the consequence of that acidity is?
That the body, trying to buffer the acid, is forced to pull essential minerals, calcium, magnesium, potassium, from your bones and teeth. The source actually uses the phrase, peeing out our bones.
Oof, that's vivid.
It is, and contrast this with getting minerals from truly bioavailable sources, like lemon water, which they argue is alkaline forming once it's in the body.
Okay. Another challenge to current trends. High-fat diets.
Yes, a strong critique here. The material argues fats, even the healthy ones, act as acid producers and, interestingly, deficiency creators.
How do they create deficiencies?
The mechanism described is that fats block nutrient absorption in the gut. And maybe more importantly, they prevent essential nutrients which need glucose to get into cells from actually entering the cells. This is presented as a core part of insulin resistance in this framework.
And this blocking effect leads to brain deficiencies.
Directly. The source claims there's a widespread lack of key things the brain desperately needs, like usable glucose, trace mineral salts, a specific form of B12, certain brain hormones, amino acids, antioxidants, minerals, phytochemicals.
And these deficiencies are the foundation for?
For so many common issues, it argues. Burnout, addiction, memory loss, brain fog, confusion, phobias, OCD, lasting depression, focus problems. It's seen as the underlying physical basis.
There was also a connection made between fat and adrenaline.
Yes, an interesting one. High fat levels in the bloodstream are said to lower oxygen and block glucose entry into cells that insulin resistance again. This triggers an emergency adrenaline release.
I'd have flight adrenaline.
Exactly. The body's attempt to thin the fat and force more oxygen intake as a protective measure.
Okay, so besides toxins and deficiencies, the material talks a lot about pathogens, right? Viruses and bacteria.
Absolutely. Identified as major, often completely missed, factors in chronic illness, especially when it affects the brain.
And there's a claim here about the medical industry.
Yeah, a pretty bold one. That the publicly known medical world is largely unaware that certain viruses actually eat, whereas a classified medical industry supposedly knows this because they feed and breed viruses in labs.
And what do these viruses supposedly eat?
According to this material, raw egg, iron, mercury, gluten, dairy, and GMO corn are listed as preferred foods.
Okay. And when they eat, they produce waste.
Exactly. They consume things like toxic heavy metals and chemicals, and then they excrete waste products called neurotoxins.
And these neurotoxins are the problem.
A huge problem, according to this view. They flood the bloodstream, the spinal fluid, cross the blood-brain barrier, cause inflammation in brain tissue and nerves.
And damage neurotransmitters, leading to misfiring.
Yes, damaging or diminishing neurotransmitters, causing electrical impulses to go haywire.
And that's what leads to symptoms.
That's the link they make to a huge range of symptoms. Headaches, migraines, mood swings, limb weakness. That deep neurological fatigue sleep doesn't fix.
Burning pain, pressure in the head, dizziness, brain fog.
Right. Brain fog is described specifically as the feeling of fragmented messages in the brain. And they connect these neurotoxins to potentially playing a role in conditions like lupus, MS, neurological Lyme, restless legs, POTS, TIAs, strokes, dysautonomia, Bell's palsy, TMJ, neuralgias.
And they specifically mention cranial nerves being affected.
Yes, viral neurotoxins impacting cranial nerves is a recurring point.
The sources also mention how viruses replicate.
Briefly, yeah. Two methods described. One where it replicates inside a human cell until it explodes, and another where viral cells replicate by touching, then snapping open, leaving behind dead, toxic viral corpses.
Okay, let's dig into the toxic heavy metals mentioned: mercury, aluminum, copper, nickel, lead. How did they affect the brain, according to this?
Primarily by messing with the brain's electricity, weakening, burning out, shorting out, or twisting the electrical currents needed for the brain to function properly.
Do they cause physical damage, too?
Yes, by oxidizing brain tissue. This damage, the source claims, might even be visible on scans as gray spots, dark spots, white spots, lesions, even if conventional medicine doesn't interpret it as metal damage. It's seen as causing rapid brain aging and degeneration.
And they don't just stay separate, they can combine.
Right, that's the alloy brain concept. Metals combining two or more, forming unique alloys. These can settle in different brain areas, back, front, hemispheres, midline, and have different effects. And apparently, they can even travel over time.
What symptoms are linked specifically to metals?
Headaches, weird sensations, aches, weakness, feeling lightheaded, changes in emotional reactions, depression, anxiety, kinetes, spasms, brain fog again, memory loss, obsessions, compulsions, involuntary actions, even altered decision-making.
And there's a link between metals and viruses again.
A crucial one. Viruses often feed on these metals, which fuels their neurotoxin production. Different viruses supposedly prefer different metals.
Like specific examples.
Yeah, they suggest, for instance, shingles or EBV, feeding on lead and copper, might produce heavier neurotoxins that settle lower down, potentially causing restless legs. Other metal chemical combinations fed on by viruses could lead to potent neurotoxins, causing neuromuscular issues. Copper and nickel feeding might lead to a dermatoxin, causing skin and muscle problems.
And these metals, can we inherit them? Or are they always from recent exposure?
Both, according to the material. Metals can be inherited, passed down generationally. These are described as older, more oxidized. And then there are metals from newer, ongoing environmental exposures.
Yeah, okay, back to copper specifically for a second. How does it interfere?
It's described as a highly conducting metal that messes with electrical messages going in and out of the brain. It kind of draws energy away from neurons, triggers sympathetic responses like sweating, weakens, or destroys neurotransmitters.
And it can run cold in the brain.
Yeah, hindering electrical flow that way too.
And the metal-adrenaline connection.
Metals cause this continuous heating process, apparently, which triggers adrenaline release as the body tries to cool things down and keep electricity balanced. This constant toxic overload from metals, chemicals, acids, plastics, radiation makes someone more susceptible to addiction.
Because the adrenaline provides temporary relief.
Exactly. Relief from the inflammation and electrical chaos caused by the toxins.
Yeah.
So you seek that feeling again.
Okay. And lastly, in this section, strep bacteria.
Identified as a major player in gut issues like SIBO. And reinforcing the point made earlier, fermented foods and probiotics, in this view, don't kill or stop strep.
All right, let's shift to the brain-emotion connection. This isn't just psychological, according to these books.
No, they argue it's deeply physical. Emotional experiences, conflict. They trigger adrenaline surges that physically change electrical patterns in the brain.
They even mention emotional strokes.
Yes, suggesting tiny blood vessels in the brain's emotional centers can get temporarily damaged by these surges or by toxicity. This could lead to brain tissue becoming kind of calloused, making neurons there hypersensitive.
And PTSD, emotional wounds. How do they fit in?
Related to the severity of both a soul injury, as the source calls it, and actual physical injury in those emotional brain centers, often made worse by toxic heavy metals.
Yep.
How people experience and cope varies, obviously, and sometimes these wounds manifest physically or emotionally much later, maybe around age 30 or older.
So emotional healing is tied to the physical brain state.
Fundamentally, yes, in this view. Brain heat from toxins and metals can kill brain cells. Clean cells handle heat better. High fat intake triggers that adrenaline cycle, hindering deep healing. So how quickly you heal depends on the injury, the presence of brain betrayers, and whether the brain has the supplies it needs.
What about depression? How is that framed?
Lasting depression is seen as the soul detecting something foreign, an invader, a substance in the body. It's the soul signaling something is physically wrong internally, a need for purification.
A misunderstood enlightenment.
That's the term used, emphasizing it's not the person's fault, not just mental, but the soul's physical reaction to contamination,
And anxiety.
primarily caused by toxic heavy metals, according to these sources. Viruses and metals often go together because viruses feed on metals, releasing those neurotoxins. These neurotoxins act like allergens to nerves in or near the brain, triggering anxiety.
So other symptoms often come with the anxiety?
Usually, yes, due to the neurotoxins. Trauma might be a trigger, but only if these underlying physical issues, metals, viruses, toxic blood, are already present, according to this perspective.
Okay, let's reconsider addiction then, not just genetic or a moral issue.
Not primarily, no. The core argument here is that many addictions, caffeine, alcohol, even psychedelics, are fundamentally adrenaline addiction.
Because poisons, toxins, high fat trigger adrenaline release.
Right, as a protective measure. That adrenaline surge gives temporary relief from the toxic inflammation and impediments in the brain. You get hooked on seeking that relief. Toxic overload makes you more susceptible.
So caffeine addiction isn't about the caffeine itself.
It's addiction to the adrenaline it triggers,
Yeah.
in this view. Caffeine is seen as a poison that forces the body to expel nutrients when it leaves. They even suggest caffeine exposure early in life can prime you for later addiction,
What about alcohol?
seen as toxic in any amount. The liver prioritizes processing it over releasing glucose. Alcohol pushes glucose aside, forcing the brain to use alcohol, called a ghost of sugar, as fuel instead.
And being drunk is the brain starting to starve.
That's how it's presented, yes. Starving for its proper fuel, glucose.
They also critique microdosing.
Strongly. Framed as just another adrenaline addiction cycle, that feeling of, I survived that, or spiritual growth, linked to the adrenaline surge triggered by what they see as a poison. It's just modernized moderation, they argue, but you still pay a health price.
Okay, let's talk about the communication network. Cranial nerves, vagus nerve, how are they affected?
Cranial nerves are described as these complex weaves of nerve cells. Inflammation, often from those viral neurotoxins, can affect specific strands.
Leading to different symptoms depending on the nerve.
Exactly. Vision problems, jaw issues, weird head sensations, balance, swallowing, speech, hearing, facial movement, pain, twitching, nausea, tooth gum pain, loss of smell or taste. Depends which nerve and function is hit. Inflammation can be along the nerve or right in the brainstem.
And the vagus nerves.
Crucial channels to lungs, heart, stomach, gut. If neuron messaging gets contaminated by brain betrayers, the signals going up to the brainstem and down the vagus nerves get skewed or erratic.
Causing issues like irregular heartbeat, even without a heart problem.
That's the kind of example given. Brainstem inflammation itself can also cause signals to build up and release erratically.
So this leads to a critique of just doing vagus nerve exercises.
A strong one, yes. For chronic issues, the argument is the vagus nerves are already hypersensitive due to underlying problems. Exercises alone might not work, could even make things worse, if the root causes toxins, viruses, deficiencies aren't dealt with.
Healthy people might feel a temporary benefit, but it's not the answer for the chronically ill.
That's the position. Real healing requires addressing the cause, giving the nerve what it needs, and removing what's harming it.
Right. So we've covered a lot of the why, according to this material. Let's move on to the what to do, the tools and strategies for healing. That's a big part of the companion book, right?
A huge part. And again, these tools are meant to be personalized to help you build healing momentum. Even just identifying and removing those brain betrayers we talked about, that alone is presented as potentially having a massive healing effect.
Okay, and there's a new tool called brain shot therapy for instant relief.
Yes, that's the idea. Offering some immediate help while you work on the deeper, longer-term stuff.
How does it work?
Basically, you make these simple healing elixirs using specific combinations of ingredients. There are 30 different shots grouped into categories like exposures, shifters, and stabilizers.
Can you give an example?
Sure. There's a memory refresher shot with radish, sage, apple, celery aimed at helping when old memories keep bubbling up. Or a mood shifter,
What's in that one?
wild blueberries, fresh juice or powder chives, basil, alfalfa sprouts, lime, celery, maybe some grapes. For when you're feeling irritable, frustrated, overwhelmed, gloomy, just emotionally off balance.
It's stabilizers.
More general purpose, helping you feel stable in a world that feels, well, destabilizing. Like the nerve gut acid stabilizer.
What does that do?
Aims to strengthen vagus nerves, help with digestive issues like spasms, gas, gastritis, mild reflux, undigested food. It mentions sprout options too, like broccoli or clover. but cautions against spicy ones. And notes aloe vera shock therapy for more acute reflux.
Are there others, like for specific situations?
Yeah, there's even one called the betrayal and broken trust stabilizer. And a dream shifter you can take at any time to help understand dreams if you have trouble dreaming or if dreams are troubling or stressful.
And you can use these shots individually or as part of cleanses.
Exactly. Standalone or in structured brain shot therapy cleanses.
Okay, what about shock therapies? You mentioned aloe vera for reflux.
Right. There's also golden seal shock therapy. The directions involve taking a specific amount, 6 dropperfuls for adults of alcohol-free tincture in water or juice or straight, every 4 waking hours for 3 to 5 days. Then you adjust based on your needs, maybe lower the dose if you're sensitive.
And the aloe vera one, more detail.
Use only the inner gel from a big store-bought leaf. Avoid the green skin and the base. Eat it straight or blend it with water. Keynote: based on large store-bought leaves. And if you use homegrown, make sure it's an edible type.
Celery juice comes up a lot. What are the rules for that in this material?
Very strict rules. Fresh, plain, straight juice only. Nothing added.
No ice, water, lemon, ACV, collagen.
Absolute none of that. No mix-ins. Not blended with the pulp. Not from powder. Not pasteurized. Not HPP treated.
Any juicer is okay, though.
Any juicer works, but cold press is considered best. Buying it fresh is okay too. Drink it right away, ideally, but storing a second serving chilled and airtight is acceptable. There are also guidelines for kids' amounts.
Why so strict?
Because, according to this view, adding anything compromises its specific healing properties, which they claim come from undiscovered sodium cluster salts in the celery.
Okay. Heavy metal detox. Key ingredients.
Cilantro, barley grass juice powder, spirulina, wild blueberries, and Atlantic dulse. The synergy is key.
How do they work together?
Cilantro, barley grass juice powder, spirulina, and wild blueberries work on the toxic load itself. But the Atlantic dulse is crucial. It acts like a safety net, grabbing onto metals as they're pulled into the bloodstream and lymph, helping them exit safely via the kidneys and other routes.
Supplementation needs to be personalized.
Absolutely. Find your symptoms or conditions in the list provided in the books. You don't need everything. Start small, maybe just 1 or 2, or go for more, depending on sensitivity and what feels right for you.
Timing.
With food, if it's twice a day, space them about 4 hours apart. Can be taken with or without food.
Hydration is key too, I assume.
Definitely. Minimum 60 ounces of water daily is recommended. Can include coconut water, lemon water, but important space plain water 15-30 minutes away from celery juice or brain shots so they can absorb properly without being diluted too fast.
And there are specific recipes for lemon water or coconut water guidelines.
Yes, proper ratios and temperature for lemon lime water and avoiding pink or red coconut water.
Herbal support.
Thyme tea and thyme water recipes are mentioned, using fresh or dried thyme, hot water, with optional additions like lemon, honey, berries, cucumber, mint.
And recipes for meal.
Loads. Over 100 healing recipes in the companion book. Things like different potato dishes, garlic and herb peas, strawberry salsa, sweet potato nori wraps, mushroom mince. Lots of options.
Any recipe tips mentioned?
Find tomato paste without additives. Use their specific healing broth recipe instead of water for extra flavor and nutrients. And you can always reduce or skip salt if needed.
Okay, back to the cleanses. Brain shot therapy cleanses.
7 options there. You can work through the shots systematically over 10, 20, or 30 days. Like, an advanced cleanse might involve 3 of the same shot per day, spaced out, then a new shot the next day, working through different groups.
And the goal of these cleanses?
Presented as powerful ways to remove toxins, chemicals, restore supplies, and help clear symptoms and conditions. The advanced high-powered ones are even suggested to potentially clear 100-plus symptoms. They're also framed as spiritual cleanses.
But you still need supplements long-term.
For ongoing support against pathogens, yes, supplementation protocols are recommended. And there are adjustments for kids, too.
What about heavy metal detox cleanses?
Options there, too, like the performance cleanse. Start with lemon lime water, then celery juice, then the HMD smoothie for breakfast.
And finally, a blood draw protocol. What's the concern there?
The concern raised is that standard blood draws can weaken the immune system, remove immune cells, stress bone marrow, especially if you're already chronically ill.
So what's the protocol?
A specific 1-week plan to follow after a blood draw, using celery juice, lemon lime water, coconut water, incorporating healing recipes, aiming to strengthen the immune system that's left, lessen the shock, build blood back up, restore nutrients.
And the point is, rebuilding takes time, not just fixed by a cookie.
Exactly. Emphasizes it takes time and real support. While acknowledging blood tests can be valuable, it critiques the practice of frequent draws for the chronically ill.
Okay, this material definitely doesn't shy away from challenging established ideas, both conventional and alternative.
Not at all. It critiques the publicly known medical industry pretty directly, suggests it's underfunded in key areas like viral research, influenced by a classified industry, and mostly unaware of the root causes discussed here like viruses eating, the full impact of metals and neurotoxins.
Modern neuroscience claims are questioned too.
Yeah, often described as mostly theorizing and not really providing answers for chronic illness sufferers.
Standard spinal taps are criticized for.
Not testing for the right things, the contaminants or viral byproducts this material identifies as crucial.
Food belief systems get challenged. Moderation. Vegan versus carnivore debates.
Argues they miss the underlying physical causes presented in these books.
The idea that addiction is mainly genetic.
Critiqued. Explanations like it's skipping a generation are seen as lacking awareness of the real physical drivers discussed earlier, like the adrenaline connection.
An understanding of acidity.
Critiques both alternative and conventional views, suggesting they misunderstand the sources and effects, and some alkaline approaches might even make things worse.
There's a strong point made about the term orthorexia.
A very strong point, described as being weaponized and demeaning. Used, the material argues, to dismiss people genuinely trying to heal serious mystery illnesses through diet because nothing else worked. It ignores their real struggles in history.
What about trendy health practices? Fasting, specific exercises, saunas.
Viewed skeptically for the truly sick. Might offer temporary benefits for the not-so-sick with mild issues, the source suggests, but don't address root causes for those who are severely ill. And the not-so-sick often can't relate to the depth of the struggle or the specific recovery needed.
Alzheimer's and dementia causes. There's a critique there, too.
Yes, framed as medical science pretending ignorance, especially about the mercury-aluminum link. Why? Because the truth, it's argued, threatens industries, medical, pharma, cosmetics, food, chemical, using these metals. Alzheimer's charities are seen as helpful for care, but blocked from finding the root cause cure due to this hidden info.
And a frustration mentioned is how this medical medium info gets distorted.
Yes, getting garbled, misinterpreted.
Yeah.
Sometimes used by research without credit, but twisted so it doesn't actually lead to healing. Like the chlorella to charcoal switch example, both advised against internally by the source, but people only hear half the story elsewhere.
Okay, to kind of wrap things up, the material brings in the soul's role and empowerment.
Right. The soul is described almost like a ghost in the brain, but more powerful than consciousness or conditioning, holding light, past memories, guiding us.
And depression is the soul detecting an invader.
Yes, signaling that need for purification we mentioned.
And the brain shot cleanses are spiritual too.
Described that way, yes. Physical and spiritual, removing toxins to let the soul's light shine.
So empowerment comes from knowing there are things you can do.
Exactly. Especially after maybe struggling for years without answers. The material suggests spiritual forces of light help people find this information.
And there's an opportunity for results if you apply the information.
That's the emphasis. For those who put energy into learning and applying this knowledge, presented as coming from above, it's positioned as delivering where other approaches may have failed.
So the final message is about being proactive.
Very much so. Proactive about reducing exposures to betrayers and actively supporting your immune system with this knowledge and these specific tools.
Wow. Okay. That was incredibly detailed. A really deep dive into this specific and, challenging perspective on health from these books.
It really covers a lot of ground. We went through the complex landscape this material lays out, the alleged real challenges to our brains and bodies, from pathogens and metals to toxic exposures and dietary issues.
And a completely different way of looking at things like anxiety, depression, addiction.
Yeah, the core message coming through from these sources is pretty clear. Many mystery symptoms in chronic conditions aren't personal feelings or just bad genes or all in your head. They're presented as physical problems.
Stemming from environmental factors, internal imbalances, building up over time.
Right. And importantly, the material doesn't just diagnose the problem, it offers this whole system of specific tangible steps and tools.
From avoiding the betrayers to using specific foods, supplements, protocols like the brain shots, the cleanses, it lays out a distinct path. Okay, so listening to all this, what does it mean for you? It's worth considering, isn't it? The implications of a framework that challenges so much conventional understanding even points fingers at industries.
Yeah, if this material suggests hidden causes or overlooked solutions for things you or someone you know might be struggling with, What does that spark for your own health journey?
What might be the very next step you consider taking, just based on hearing this perspective laid out? Something to think about.
Definitely. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.